r/AskReddit. Sailors, what's the creepiest, scariest, or most unnerving thing you've seen or witnessed while at sea? I worked on tugboats for about 6 years. The back deck is considered a wet deck, meaning it isn't unusual for it to be underwater at times. We were making tow with an oil rig at sea with waves that were 14 to 16 feet, and one hit us just right, taking my coworker George and pulling him out to sea. Now it's 3 AM and pitch black. This is nearly always a death sentence. About 20 seconds later, which felt like an eternity, another wave brought George back on deck, plopping him safely on his ass right next to the winch. George laughed and got right back to work without missing a beat. Similar thing happened to me on a shrimper out in the Gulf. Man got washed overboard and immediately disappeared in 10 to 15 foot seas. Captain started to turn the boat around when the guy popped up alongside the boat lifted by a big wave. He was so close I actually reached out and grabbed him by the hood on his rain suit and held him long enough for another crew member to help get him on board. This guy didn't go back to work. He laid on the deck and vomited and turned pure white. He didn't come out of his bunk until we got back to the docks and he never went shrimping again. I don't blame him. During Hurricane Harvey I was in the Gulf of Mexico. I was given a choice of the boat I always get or a newer one with some of my friends. I chose the newer boat and this was a great choice. The boat I was on we had tied off to a barge and pushed it against the dock to protect it from the heavy winds and rough seas. The anemometer, wind speed sensing device, was pegged out at 200 miles an hour. It was very nerve-wracking but nothing compared to the other tug. The other tug collided with another boat. The engineer saw water rushing into the engine room. By the time he made it to the wheelhouse to tell the captain, the water level got above the generator and the boat blacked out. The captain gave the order to get out of the sinking boat and onto the bow. Coast Guard informed the captain that they could not safely get to them for hours. Radio system is on battery backup so having no power did not yet affect this. So the tug sank, but kind of ran aground on this sandbar that only existed because of the hurricane. They sat there huddling each other for warmth. They told me every time they had to piss they just let it go because the warmth felt great. Eventually the boat traveled close to a barge where the captain jumped ship first in a very all-for-yourself manner. He slipped on his landing and knocked himself out cold on the deck. Everyone else managed to get out safely, and when everything settled, the boat I was on went over to help recover the mess. My dad and I were sailing in the Sea of Cortez. It was early morning with some patchy surface fog. I was 14 or 15 at the time. We heard what sounded like applause in the distance, but becoming louder. We could soon see a patch of disturbed water getting closer and closer and hundreds of objects flying out of the water and splashing back down. A few of them flew out, hit the deck of the boat, and bounced back into the water. Stingrays. A whole school of them, jumping out of the water for some reason. It was weird and awesome. Ugh, the Sea of Cortez gives me nightmares. I'm not a boat person, but I remember taking an overpass boat ride through the Sea of Cortez as a kid and was asking about life jackets. They said they'd usually hand them out but not that night and kind of cringed at the question and said the Red Devils would take anyone in the water. That night was a full moon and I swear, the sea was teeming with the biggest damn squid you're ever likely to see on the surface. Apparently they take chunks out of people and swarm like piranhas. I don't know if it was exaggeration, but those things man. They threw some fish guts over the side, and it was like a frenzy. I wouldn't want to get caught out there in the water with them. Their scientific name is Humboldt squid. They can be a meter long, form packs, have clawed tentacles and sharp beaks, very predatory and cannibalistic. There's a documentary on them made by a guy who scuba dived with them. He made a male suit to protect himself against their tentacles because they attack shiny parts of diving equipment and can injure a person. Giant spears plunging in and out of the sea. In the Gulf of Alaska, I have seen some shit. But one of the most terror-inspiring things I've seen are what can happen with some of the loose logs from the logging trade. Sometimes when a big log gets loose from a raft, it becomes partially waterlogged and floats small end up. So you have this 4-foot diameter telephone pole in the sea, sticking up 40 feet into the air. No biggie. Shows up on radar, and easy to spot. Now, give that pole 20 years of floating around or so. It rots in such a way that it becomes filed to a point by wind and waves, and looks quite menacing. Now, put it in a gale with 25-foot waves, 50 feet trough to peak. And it becomes a towering spike of death that shoots up from the sea every 15 to 20 minutes, out of nowhere, 60 feet into the air, only to plunge down into the dark depths waiting to skewer some unsuspecting boat in a few minutes, when it thrusts out of the ocean again. It is a genuine terrifying sight, rare, but not so rare, that I haven't seen two in one season. It's like the spike dig of Neptune looking for an opportunity to duck your shit up in a particularly terrifying way. Is there a name for them? I can't seem to find anything searching just sea spear. From this day forward I'll only know it as the spike dig of Neptune. They are called deadheads. Pumping deadheads, when they do this. Utter nightmare fuel. I almost exclusively sail in the very calm Puget Sound, and I've still seen one sink a dock. 2 years ago I was about 150 miles offshore from Long Island, New York, in a 31-foot boat. We were trolling for yellowfin tuna. In the distance we saw two hugfins coming out of the water, so we headed towards them thinking it was a couple of sharks. As we got closer, we realized it was one big shark. There it was just cruising slowly at the surface, not even the slightest bit disturbed by us approaching. Once we got up next to it, we realized that this shark was almost as big as the boat. It had to be at least 25 feet long and several thousand pounds. I was in absolute shock as we passed it. I'd never seen a shark even close to that big. I've seen plenty of whales, turtles, dolphins, sharks, all kinds of crazy things out at sea. But never a predator this large. It was definitely not a whale shark. This thing was a killer. I want to say that it was a tiger shark, but the internet says they don't even get close to that big, so I really just don't know. I wish I could have gotten a picture of it, but I was just frozen. I couldn't even move. I will never forget that moment. The ocean is an incredible place. There are a few sharks that theoretically could get that big. The great white deep blue was estimated to be somewhere between 20 to 25 feet long when she was filmed a few years ago. Greenland sharks can reach those sizes as well, but they are deep sea sharks that live in mostly icy waters. One was found with the whole body of moose in it once. Whale sharks, basking, and megamouth sharks of course get that big, but they are filter feeders. It is believed that certain species of six-gill sharks might reach that length. There are unverified reports of tiger sharks that big, but again those reports have never been verified. I hope these rare creatures are never found and murdered by man. A couple of years ago I was sailing as a cadet on a merchant vessel, and I was scheduled on the evening watch. The rest of the crew was enjoying dinner, and I was to call if anything went wrong. We were sailing over open ocean, no land within a day sailing around us, and all of a sudden I notice a island coming up on my bow. It was still far away, but it shouldn't be there. I looked at the maps, checked my position multiple times, and then I noticed the island did not appear on my radars. I called down to the mess room to tell there was a weird island in front of us. The chief mate came up and checked again the maps and positions. He also noticed that the radars did not see the island. We called the captain, and when he came up he started laughing. He was an old sailor with over 40 years of experience under his belt. He explained us it was a Fata Morgana. The real island was more than a day sailing away in the direction we were heading at that moment. After that incident he took over the watch and I went down. It wasn't really creepy, but it was strange. What's a fatal Morgana? The Fata Morgana is caused by low-level temperature differences that can cause light to do strange things. Sometimes things about a finger width or two on the horizon appear stretched, very common in very cold climates. Other times things can be reflected in the sky or seen over the horizon. Most likely caused by total internal reflection, where the light gets trapped and reflected by the differing density of air above, like being underwater at the just right angle. You can't see above the surface. The light reflects like a mirror. A mate of mine I was working on a tuna boat with came across an aeroplane emergency life jacket floating in the water about 200 miles out at sea, east coast of New Zealand. One of the main ocean current centers above the east coast of NZ, so could have come from anywhere really. Good chance it came from an airplane though. Not a sailor, however this was at sea. My dad went boating with some friends down near Rocky Point in Mexico in the mid-90s. They went out late at night to drink. It was incredibly dark apart from the boat lights when suddenly a helicopter flew above their boat and the local who took them out shut everything off immediately. The helicopter hovered over some water in the distance and dumped a few bodies into the water before flying off. When it was out of sight the local turned everything back on and shrugged it off saying, "They do that all the time. Never seen it so close up before." Who was in the helicopter? Did the local say? There's really only two kinds of people who would have the capacity and necessity to do this, barring some random millionaire getting sick kicks. Either cartels or government. I did a double-handed overnight race last summer and had a 45-minute conversation with my grandfather while on watch. I was the only one on deck and my grandfather had been dead for 3 years at that point. I'm fairly certain hypothermia, dehydration, low blood sugar, and exhaustion were all in play, but it was super weird. You would have never heard that story though. Unless you had hypothermia, dehydration, low blood sugar, and exhaustion. I'm not a sailor, but my family owns a boat and I frequently go out on fishing trips in the sea with my dad. It's usually more us talking about life with him doing most of the fishing. Well, on one trip, we were out about I think 10 miles from the beach. My dad was telling me about how he got into and won a bar fight, and I was just silently listening when a weird whistling/howling sound sort of surrounded us. I can't really describe it. It was like a cross between a whale and the sound of someone blowing air over an open bottle. My dad looked pretty calm, but I could tell he was freaked out too. It went on for about another minute, slowly becoming stronger, until it just abruptly ended with a screech from somewhere in the water. We never talk about it, and I still wonder what was making that sound. You can hear whale song through the hull of some boats. Yarrow matey, that just be the sirens. Not a sailor, but a marine on a ship. We were cruising through the Pacific when we received an SOS from a boat. From what I heard he was trying to cross the ocean by himself. Took a few days to find him. I remember watching off the side of the ship. The sails were imprinted with the Chinese flag. A small team was sent to board the small sailboat. But when they arrived no one was on board. We searched for a body for the following days but found nothing. Still don't know what happened to him. Did you keep the Chinese boat, or was it junk? That's a bit above my pay grade, but if I had to guess it was returned to his family or sailing buddies. I was in a kayak and a swan bit me on the ear. Does that count? No luck catching them swans, then. It's just the one swan, actually. I was pulling a small sailboat mast from the bottom of a lake during a storm. Waves had turtled the boat. So I was about 10 feet down and pulling the mast up, and the weight of it pushed me down, so I was basically standing at the bottom of the lake and could see the waves up top. It was an overall weird/frightening/stimulating experience. And then something big swam past me and brushed my leg. Must have been at least 3 feet long. I eventually got the boat turned back over and the mast on board, and we got towed in. As we hit land I laid down on the beach and decided I wasn't going to go in the water for a couple days. I hate swimming in lakes and the ocean because I don't want to share my swimming space with big slimy creatures. I'm scared of deep dark water to the point where even encountering it in video games gives me anxiety. When I was about 19, maybe 20, my mom's boyfriend at the time decided to take us out on his boat one afternoon so that we could lounge around and swim in the ocean far from the shore. We were super excited because the water was turquoise, completely see-through, and the perfect temperature that day. So we found what seemed to be the perfect location, dropped the anchor, and had a snack. Before long, we were completely surrounded by hundreds of giant milky white jellyfish. There were so many that we couldn't see clear water anywhere around us. Their bells were easily 5 feet in diameter, if not more. We did not swim that day. This happened to my wife and I when we were in Vix near Puerto Rico. Except when the jellyfish swarmed the area, we weren't in the boat. We were already in the water doing some snorkeling and were pretty far from the boat. Had to very carefully make our way back. Wife was majorly freaked out. Not scary, just odd. But one time we were docked in Bermuda and somebody ducked up and dumped the galley waste into the harbor. I have never seen so much marine life in one place. Every type of fish imaginable, turtles the whole whack, all on a feeding frenzy. It got so crazy that you couldn't really see water anymore for about 5 meters off the ship. Just a mass of crazy writhing fish. I used to sail competitively and never get seasick on boats, but I do when scuba diving in swells. The first time it happened was when I was getting my deep certification. I asked my instructor what to do if I puked into my regulator, and he said some would just naturally come out, and if the regulator seemed clogged, just pop it off and purge it. You'll just feed the fish. Purging is when you press a button to force air and water out. Sure enough, 6 months later I was diving in shallow swells in the Bahamas when I got that rolling feeling. I puked, and my instructor was right. I was instantly swarmed by dozens of hungry reef fish. It was one of the coolest and grossest things I've ever seen. On a Navy ship, we were out on patrol and took a massive lightning bolt to the aft mast at the same time as the wind picked up significantly. We started listing quite heavily, and the thunder made it sound like we hit something. Most of us got really fired up and immediately ran below the waterline to do damage assessment. One guy ran to the bridge to check out what had happened. Luckily it was only lightning and not something we'd hit, but it really felt like we had. Apart from fire alarms, I've never been so ready to do damage control in my life.